Quick, without looking at your phone, point north. Just try it. Most people cannot do this reliably in their own neighborhood, a place they have walked 1,000 times. And yet for most of human history, people navigated 5,000 miles of open ocean, crossed deserts with no landmarks, and walked home across a featureless snowfield in a whiteout, using nothing but their eyes, their memory, and their gut. No compass, no GPS, no paper map. They did this constantly, for hundreds of thousands of years, and mostly they did not die. Today we are going everywhere. Polynesian sailors reading the ocean like a page of text. Aboriginal Australians singing their way across an entire continent. Inuit hunters navigating a landscape that offers no landmarks at all. Vikings possibly using a magic rock to find the sun through solid cloud cover. Romans who basically invented turn-by-turn directions 2,000 years before anyone typed an address into a phone. This is the video nobody made until now. Let's go. Here is the big idea before we get into specifics. Before compasses, before maps, before anyone had written down so much as a single direction, the human brain and body built an absurdly sophisticated toolkit for figuring out where you are and where you are going. Stars, wind, waves, smell, memory, story. Some of these methods took years of apprenticeship to learn properly. Some of them are honestly still not fully understood by modern researchers. And there is a real argument, one we will get to at the end, that we have quietly lost most of this ability in about 2 generations because we outsourced it to a little rectangle in our pocket. Keep that tension in mind as we go. Instinct and training on one side, tools on the other. Let's start in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, because nothing on this list beats it. Polynesian wayfinding is one of the great feats of applied science in human history, except nobody involved would have called it science. They called it navigation, and they pulled it off across the largest ocean on Earth, in open canoes, with no compass, sextant, or clock. Here is roughly how it worked. A trained navigator memorized what's called a star compass, a mental map of about 32 points on the horizon, defined by where specific stars rise and set. Different stars rise at different points depending on the season, so the navigator effectively carried a rotating celestial GPS in his head, star by star, for the entire voyage. But stars only work at night, and only when the sky is clear. So, during the day, the navigator switched to waves. Ocean swells travel in consistent patterns generated by distant, steady winds, and a trained navigator could lie down in the hull of the canoe and feel the pattern of swells passing underneath, sensing tiny deviations that told him the canoe had drifted off course. Sit with that for a second. These navigators were using their own body as a directional sensor while lying in the dark, hundreds of miles from anything. On top of that, they read cloud formations, since certain cloud shapes tend to form over islands long before the island itself comes into view. They watched bird behavior too, since some seabirds fly out to sea in the morning to fish and return to land at dusk, meaning the right bird at the right time of day points straight at land you cannot see yet. Stack all of that together, stars, swells, clouds, birds, constantly cross-checked and adjusted by feel, and you get navigators who reliably found islands that are pinpricks in an ocean covering 1/3 of the planet. And this is not ancient legend dressed up for a documentary. In 1976, a double-hulled canoe called the Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti, over 2,000 miles of open ocean, using nothing but traditional wayfinding taught by a Micronesian navigator named Mau Pialug, one of the last people alive who still carried this knowledge in full. They made it, on purpose, guided by 32 invisible points on a star compass that existed only in one man's head, from open ocean to open desert in a way, because Aboriginal Australian songlines solve a completely different problem with an equally wild solution. Australia is enormous, mostly flat, and much of it looks the same for hundreds of miles. Scrub, red dirt, more scrub. So how do you navigate a route that might run 1,000 kilometers through country with almost no obvious landmarks? You don't draw a map, you sing one. Songlines are oral traditions, long narrative songs that encode a specific route across the landscape, tying each stretch of the journey to a piece of story, an ancestral figure, a particular waterhole or rock formation. Walking the song line while singing it in the correct order works like turn-by-turn directions, except the directions are baked into mythology, melody, and memory instead of ink. Someone who knew the right song for the right country could navigate territory they had genuinely never physically walked before, using nothing but the order of the song as their route. Some songlines stretch enormous distances across the continent, occasionally connecting with songlines belonging to neighboring language groups, so a route could be handed off from group to group almost like a very long relay, each section carried by people who knew that particular stretch of story. A song is the map, the rhythm is the road, and it worked, across one of the harshest environments on Earth, for tens of thousands of years. Now let's go somewhere with the opposite problem, because instead of too many features, the Arctic sometimes has none at all. Picture a whiteout. No sun, no horizon, no trees, no rocks, just white in every direction, including straight up. That is a real and genuinely disorienting experience. And yet Inuit hunters navigated through exactly this kind of landscape for generations, using a method that sounds almost too simple to work. They read the snow. In the Arctic, prevailing winds blow from roughly the same direction over long stretches of time, and that wind carves the surface of the snow into small, hard ridges called sastrugi, something like frozen waves, mostly pointing the same way. A trained Inuit navigator, sometimes by feel alone with their hands or their sled runners in low visibility, could read the direction of the sastrugi and hold a consistent heading across a landscape, offering the eye nothing to grab onto. Add in an intimate, memorized knowledge of subtle features an outsider would completely miss, small shifts in ice color, wind behavior, animal movement, and you get navigators who could cross vast stretches of featureless ice and still know exactly where they stood relative to home. No compass involved, none needed. The wind had already written the compass into the ground months earlier, and the navigator just had to know how to read it. Let's head south and east, to the North Atlantic, home to some of the roughest open water on the planet, and the Vikings, who crossed it anyway, over and over, in open wooden ships, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and eventually Newfoundland, roughly 500 years before Columbus. Vikings used the sun and stars where they could, like most seafaring cultures, but the North Atlantic has one specific, brutal problem. It is almost constantly overcast. So, what do you do when your main tool, the visible sun, disappears behind solid cloud for days? This is where the sunstone comes in, and I want to be upfront that this one is genuinely debated among researchers, so treat it that way. Old Icelandic sagas mention a sunstone used by navigators to locate the sun even in fog or heavy cloud. For a long time, this got filed under folklore. But some modern researchers think the sunstone may have been a piece of Iceland's spar, a naturally occurring transparent calcite crystal with a property called birefringence, meaning it splits light in a way that can reveal the polarization pattern of skylight, which in turn can point to where the sun sits even when the sun itself is fully hidden. Does the fact that no confirmed sunstone has ever been recovered from a Viking ship mean the technique didn't exist? Not necessarily. And there is at least one candidate crystal found in a later European shipwreck whose exact purpose is still argued over. Researchers have run experiments showing the method can work under the right conditions in a lab, but whether Vikings actually relied on it, routinely, on real voyages, is still an open question. A real hedge, and honestly a more interesting one than a clean answer would be. And finally, the Romans, who solved navigation with the least mystical, most bureaucratic method on this entire list. And credit where it's due. The Roman Empire needed to move armies, mail, and officials across an enormous, constantly growing territory reliably, and their answer was not a beautifully illustrated map, it was a list. Documents like the Antonine Itinerary are essentially exhaustive, text-based route guides. Leave this town, travel this many Roman miles, arrive at this town, repeat, city after city, road after road, across the whole empire. No pictures, no scale drawings, just an extremely long, extremely practical sequence of written directions, centuries before maps as we know them became a standard travel tool. Add in Roman milestones, physical markers along the roads listing distance to the nearest major city, and you get a navigation system that required zero training in astronomy, zero apprenticeship in oral tradition, and zero specialized sensory skill. Just literacy or someone nearby who had it and the ability to count. Here's something that ties every one of these together, and it's easy to miss if you're just collecting cool facts along the way. Almost none of this knowledge lived in books, at least not originally. And almost none of it belonged to one brilliant individual. It lived in people. It got passed down, apprentice to apprentice, generation to generation, through years of practice on real water, real ice, real desert. Losing a single master wayfinder, a single elder who knew the full songline, a single navigator who had properly memorized the star compass, could genuinely sever a whole community's connection to that entire body of knowledge, sometimes for good. Maupielug, the navigator behind the Hokulea's 1976 voyage, was one of the last people alive who still carried traditional Micronesian wayfinding knowledge in full. Had he died a decade earlier without teaching it forward, a chain of navigational knowledge stretching back thousands of years could have simply ended mid-link. That is how fragile all of this really was. Not the ocean, not the ice, the knowledge itself. So, what do we actually take from all this? First, humans facing the exact same problem. How do I get from here to there without dying or getting hopelessly lost, arrived at wildly different, completely independent solutions depending on their environment? Stars for the open ocean, song for the open desert, snow patterns for featureless ice, a crystal, maybe, for a clouded sea, a written list for a paved empire. One problem, 5 very different answers, each one shaped precisely by its landscape. Second, that says something real about human cognition. It isn't one fixed skill. It's a flexible system that builds whatever specialized tool the environment demands, given enough time and enough generations to refine it. And third, worth sitting with for a moment, there is a growing body of research suggesting heavy reliance on GPS may be measurably weakening our own spatial memory and sense of direction, which is close to the exact opposite of everything we just walked through. It isn't fully settled science, hedge fully intact, but the direction the research points is not exactly reassuring. So think about that the next time your phone dies and you actually have to find your own way home. Somewhere in your family tree, and probably not as far back as you'd think, there was someone who read the stars, felt the swell of the ocean through the hull of a boat, or watched the way the wind had carved the snow and used it to walk, sail, or paddle exactly where they needed to go. You, meanwhile, can't find the exit of a parking garage without a blue dot on a screen. Let that sink in.